I'm going to show you a modified cold pull method for cleaning clogs out of your nozzle. And this is slightly faster than a traditional cold pull, but there is a bit more risk. There's a very significant risk of getting burnt. So I've got the tools that we'll need in front of me here. I like to use a socket driver. That's going to be the safest tool to use for holding the nozzle. Depending on whether you have a V6 nozzle or a Mark 8 nozzle, you'll need either a 7 or a 6 millimeter socket respectively. You can use a wrench. If you do use a wrench, you'll want to have a pair of needle nose pliers ready to grab that nozzle once you get it loose so you don't drop it. And you'll also need some tweezers and a wrench or whatever tool you use to grab onto your heat block. And then I like to just have some paper towel to clean things with. So the process here, to step you through it, is to remove the nozzle while it's still hot, and we're going to do a cold pull using those tweezers to get the filament out of the nozzle, as opposed to the traditional cold pull method of pulling it all the way through the heat break and the Bowden tube. So I'm working with an E30 Humera here, so I will need the wrench to hold this heat block. First thing I'll do is take this silicone sock off, and those will be very hot, by the way. I have my hot end heated to 200 degrees because I normally print PLA. If you normally print PETG or ABS, you'll need to have it at the higher end of your printing temperature. So that might be 250 or 280 degrees Celsius. And the first thing we'll do is extrude a bit of filament out to make sure we have some filament primed in that nozzle. And once that filament has extruded, this is very important, you want to retract a fair bit of filament because you don't want hot filament oozing out into the threads once we have the nozzle off. So I'll retract a bit of filament back. And the next step is going to get time sensitive. We're going to grab the heat block with the wrench, and you'll notice I'm going to do this as quickly as possible with the wrench, and I'll explain why in a second. So we've got the nozzle loose here. And I'll go ahead and spin that out. Now that I've got the nozzle, what we want to do is grab that little bit of filament out of the end and pull it loose. Not much, we don't want to break it off, but we want to have just a little bit of filament out and ready. And then we're going to wait a couple seconds for that to cool down, and then we'll slowly start working that filament out. Now what I was saying a second ago with the wrench, that wrench is a large block of metal, so that's going to sink heat away from your heat block the moment it touches it. And the problem there is that as it's sinking heat away, it can trigger your thermal runaway protection, and that's going to turn the heater off, and then your whole system's going to cool down, and you'll have to turn the printer off and restart it and heat everything up again. So you want to be as quick as possible with that wrench. Now you can see it's starting to cool down. I'm just slowly working this out with the tweezers. It's going to be a pretty thick strand. You don't want to go too slow because if it cools down completely, the little bit of filament is going to get stuck in the end. If you do it just right, you get a little blob of filament on the end there, and that is the shape of the inside of your nozzle. So now that we've done that, I will go ahead and pull the nozzle out, and we're going to look through the end of that nozzle. And what we're looking for is a little pinhole of light, and we don't have one yet. Just checking off camera. So we're going to keep doing this process until we can see that pinhole of light, because what that means is that we've got all of the filament out of that nozzle and that it is completely clean. But we're not there yet, so just like the normal cold pull method, you may need to do it 2 or 3 times. So I've got that nozzle heat tightened back in. Just checking, the extruder still is at 200C. So we're going to extrude a bit more filament to prime that nozzle. And if you are working with a Bowden hot end or an extruder that lets you access the gears more easily, you can do this manually. But because I'm using a Humera, I need to do it from the printing controller. So we've got a little bit of filament extruded. Once again, very important, we're going to retract some filament back out so it doesn't ooze into those threads once we get the nozzle out. Next, same as before, I'm going to be as quick as possible with that wrench. Pop that nozzle loose, and we'll thread it out. And once again, just get a little bit of plastic ready for us, and we'll wait for it to cool. And if you're using pliers, this process can be a little bit more difficult. You'll notice I have some longer fingernails. They're useful for stuff like this so I don't burn my finger. Just to hold onto that nozzle so I don't pull the nozzle out of the socket here. I'll start working this filament out. Hopefully this time we'll get it clean. There it goes. You can, it's hard to communicate it through the camera, but you can normally feel right about when that filament starts to cool down. Right when it's at the point that you want to get to pulling. Yep, and there we go. So you can see on the end there, there's a tiny little stick of filament, and that is going to be the shape of the hole on the very end of the nozzle. And now if we pull the nozzle out and check, we can see our little pinhole of light. And so now we know this nozzle is completely clean on the inside. Outside, because it could use a little bit more help, but the inside is completely clean. So we'll go ahead and put that nozzle back on. Once again, we're going to be very quick with this wrench. We don't want to trip that thermal runaway protection and turn the heaters off. And I'll give that just a couple seconds to heat up. And while it's doing that, we'll extrude a little bit more filament out. We know our nozzle's clean now, so we're not going to do that again. But we will get it primed again, because you have to get that chamber inside the nozzle full of filament. So now that the nozzle is heated up again, we can go ahead and grab this rag and clean it off. And like I said, I like to just use a little bit of paper towel, fold it over a few times so you don't burn yourself. And that's done. We'll put our silicone sock back on, and we're ready to start printing again. By the way, that cleaning the nozzle while it's hot with a rag is a lot easier, because that filament's already heated up and workable. It's easy to just wipe it right off. So I hope that helped.